U.S. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump set for an election rematch after clinching their party's nominations. Polls suggest it will be a tight race, but as the election approaches, fears are growing about disinformation and its ability to persuade voters. How do candidates campaign if their message can be so distorted? And how do you fight an election in the age of disinformation? Well, that is the subject of a new book called The Lie Detectives by American journalist Sasha Issenberg. I spoke with him earlier. Sasha Issenberg, thanks very much for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
We are, of course, in a presidential election year. How do you expect disinformation will be employed this year?
I think we should expect in all directions in every country where there's an active election this year, and there are actually a whole lot of them, that the sort of persistence of rumor, conspiracy theory, fake audio, video it's increasingly just becoming just one of the sort of core conditions of running for office, and something that people everywhere on their campaigns, party organizations have to contend with.
We've just seen in the New Hampshire primary AI being used to fake a President Biden phone call telling Democratic supporters essentially not to vote. The person behind that campaign said he did it as a way to warn of the dangers of AI. What do you make of a defense like that?
I think the defense is the whole thing's a little weird, actually, if you start unpeeling the layers of that particular instance. But I think it's a reminder of how AI tools are just making it cheaper and faster to create sort of plausible, persuasive fakes. And I think we should be alert to the idea that this year audio is probably more of a threat than deep faked photo or video. I mean, just the sort of way that people were able to break down a Kate Middleton photo and find the imperfections of it. There are a lot of cues that you can see on a faked image, but when the audio sort of goes past, you can't go back and dwell on a particular part of it. And I think we're more likely to fall for instances where audio is the vector of the lie rather than something visual.
If mis and disinformation is only going to get worse, only going to get bigger wherever you are in the world, 50 plus countries, as you note, facing election this year, then how do we defend ourselves? What are the things that we need to equip our electorate with?
Well, I think when we think about the sort of public interest, Elections Canada has been sort of taking advances this year to be more proactive in countering disinformation about actual voting processes. But individual campaigns have to make their own decisions, and they're not here to solve society's problem for us. But they have a fair bit of sort of new tools and data to make smarter decisions about how and when to respond. And often the correct answer is not to respond. One of the challenges here is that you can end up drawing attention to something that's not getting a lot of eyeballs to begin with. The way that the social media platforms are constructed, often responding to a piece of disinformation ends up sending signals to an algorithm to amplify it because you're engaging with it, regardless of whether you're doing so approvingly or not. And it can also just distract candidates from talking about the things that they want to talk about. And so there's sort of a new playbook being developed about how to campaign in an era where your opposition isn't necessarily your opponent.
It is curious, though. I mean, what you're saying is don't necessarily try to refute lies.
Yeah, refuting them doesn't always work, can often be counterproductive. I think the best for individual citizens, there are news organizations that are being more aggressive now in fact checking. I think the best advice is there's nothing that you need to respond to or share immediately. And especially if something sort of flatters your existing biases or feels too good to be true, especially from the perspective of your political worldview, take a second back, look for a trusted sort of fact-checking organization. And if you find a fact check that shows that something that's circulating isn't true, share that with your friends. Because often one of the sort of things is that bad information travels quickly and widely, and good information doesn't get shared.
You go through a number of examples through the course of the book, and very often it is about the political right attacking the political left. But is it always, you talk about how it's coming from multiple directions. It's not always just one way.
No, it isn't. It isn't universal. In the United States, rather, the right and left have very different attitudes towards the the sort of role of disinformation. On the American right, you have trouble actually finding people who will accept the premise that disinformation is a unique category of speech, and it's become pretty universal among Republicans here to sort of believe that, quote unquote, disinformation is this idea that Democrats concocted to explain elections that they lost, particularly 2016, and that they're using to basically convince government and academia to pressure tech companies to silence conservative voices. So we have a very asymmetric conversation in the United States about whether disinformation really exists and the extent to which it's a problem worth dealing with.
Donald Trump's name is often synonymous when some people are talking about disinformation, certainly not all people. But what do you think the Joe Biden campaign learned from its last race against Trump?
They learned, first of all, that you need to be rigorous in determining which individual piece of disinformation you respond to. So much of what circulates online is not actually getting in front of the small share of voters who are persuadable in the United States, 8-10% of the electorate in a small number of states. And so the first challenge of a campaign, and Biden's was really sophisticated about this, is deciding, is this just circulating among Trump supporters? Are they making stuff up for fun or to kind of amuse themselves? Or is this actually getting in front of the voters whose opinions they care about? And when it was, they embarked on a research project to sort of think less about playing whack-a-mole with individual pieces of disinformation as they emerged, but to try to identify the sort of underlying anxieties or concerns of voters that disinformation responded to. They said, treat this like a demand-side problem, not a supply-side problem. Why are voters receptive to certain types of disinformation? And then let's address that instead of chasing whatever is sort of trending today.
Yeah, I wonder if I can ask you about the specific example in the case you're talking about, because that turned out the Democratic strategists were concerned about one piece of disinformation, and in fact, the electorate turns out to have been much more focused on a different thing completely.
Yeah, so they did this big survey project in the summer of 2020, and they cared about the reach of a particular storyline and also whether it would affect persuadable voters' choice between Biden and Trump. They found that the stuff related to Hunter Biden, a lot of people knew about it. Very few said that it would actually change their opinion, and focus groups revealed it's because they didn't see Biden as motivated by personal financial gain. But the stuff about his age was potentially influential with them. But the focus groups revealed it wasn't because they were worried about Biden's physical fitness. They saw him as a fundamentally weak political figure. They didn't really know what he believed. They weren't sure he was going to be in charge of his White House. And so the campaign's response was not to show him bicycling or like running upstairs, which they had tried to do earlier in the year. It was to show voters who were searching for terms like Biden and senile on Google, show them videos of him talking to camera unedited about his economic policies, because that's what they identified was the reason that the types of voters who were open to the stuff about quote unquote Sleepy Joe, as Trump put it, were. And so I think that's what we should sort of be attuned to this year. It might not look like the Biden campaign is responding to disinformation narratives because they're not actually talking about that thing, but their messaging will shift in ways to address what they think voters are really worried about.
Sasha Issenberg, thanks you very much.
Great talking to you. Thank you.